Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be looking at the impact of Silver Tempest and how our current decks in the format will be adapting based on the newcomers that we're getting from this set. I don't think this is going to really be an impactful set in terms of how many new archetypes there's going to be, but I do think it has a profound impact on how decks will be built and molded with a few additions from this set. So there are certainly some powerful cards in here to keep an eye on, so let's go through them. Starting off, let's have a look at the Pre-tempest format. Now, of course, Lost Origin is still ongoing. There's still a regionals to be played in this format, but it's pretty much wrapped up, at least for NA, so we can have a pretty good idea of what decks were some of the strongest. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have the online breakdown. These are of placements in top 8. You can see Giratina Lost Zone was one of the most effective achievers at making that top 8 placement. Kieran Palkia Intel, the Melanie decks also very, very strong. More different Lost Zone builds, Mew, Zoroark, Arc Gudra as well. These are all sort of among the top decks in the game right now. And on the right-hand side, you can see, I think this is the amount of placements of decks from IRL tournaments as well. And the Reggies obviously had a huge breakout performance in one of these regionals, so it's pole vaulted right up that list. And also bear in mind that Gift Energy doesn't work on online, so it does skew the data in terms of the Reggies down here. With Gift Energy, who knows, they could be climbing quite substantially, just like we've seen in IRL play. But I do think this gives a pretty good look at some of the best performers going into this new Silver Tempest format. But first we have some new contenders to have a quick look at. Now, like I said, I don't think there's too many decks that are going to be breakout. I think the Lugia deck is very, very strong. I think there's a lot of potential here. The Assemble start allowing us to cheat the mechanic of fossil evolution, one of the hardest things to do in the TCG, and just grab Archeops from the discard pile and bring them straight into play. That gives us incredible energy acceleration. I'm really excited about this archetype. I've already had a few test games with the deck, and I do think it has a lot of staying power. That 220 baseline can be pushed with powerful colorless energies, with Choice Belt. You can have V-Guard energy on here as well to become a very tanky, colorless type Pokemon, similar to Arceus, which means we can lean into Sharon's Care, to Dunsparce, these sorts of things. Very, very promising archetype. It may have a slight similar feel to Hisuian Zoro in that we have that mini quest of getting evolutions in our discard pile, but it's has a little bit less draw in the opening stages. But as soon as you get those Archeops out, you have so much tutor from the deck that you're constantly thinning your deck very nicely. So you just have good cards remaining in the list, which is really cool to see. The Regidrago deck, I'm still unconvinced. I think this is going to be pretty combo-centric. The attack cost is very awkward on the Drago V-Star, which is sort of the main drawback. I do like its V-Star ability to help you fuel your discard pile with dragon types and even get some specific things out of that discard pile that you've Ultra Balled away early or thrown away, even just from the legacy itself. You can get a couple key pieces to make sure you are attacking on turn 2, but there's such a random element going on here, and because of that awkward attack cost, your tempo isn't that high. You probably need to begin with a Dragonite attack anyway, so it feels like you could just be an Arceus deck and powering up other attackers that has more consistency behind it with Starbirth, whereas the Drago is trying to be all singing, all dancing, have one-hit KO potential, have tanking potential with like Gudra and whatnot, but it's probably too much to get going. And then I think the only other thing that I could really make out as a decent deck will be this Regieleki VMAX buffing lightning-type basic Pokemon. Could be very helpful for Vikavolt, which is kind of knocking on the door with the amount of Lost Zone in the game right now. But I think increasing this Paralyzing Bolt damage to be even more dangerous has a lot of potential, I think. And we could even have maybe even a couple of Raikou in the deck as well to have that sort of pivot. Once you've bought the tempo with Paralyzing Bolt and slowing the opponent down, if you're ahead enough in a race, you can then turn into this just racing deck with some Raikous to fall back on. I think that has some potential going ahead. And it does admittedly have decent lightning type coverage into Lugia, which is reasonable. Like I said, there is Dunsparce, but make them have it under item lock and everything gets more difficult, right? So there you go. Let's start talking about the real decks that we already know in the Lost Origin format and their new possible inclusions from Silver Tempest. And the Serena supporter is something you'll see on pretty much every slide today. I think this card is bananas. I think in this microcosm where we don't yet have EXs from Scarlet and Violet, the fact that we can Gus up V Pokemon is monstrous, and it basically is a strict upgrade to boss. Now, it's hard to say the word strict because there are downsides. Obviously, you can't pick off like Radiant Pokemon or other one-prize bench sitters like Bibarel, but I think there'll be a number of decks that already have sort of control of the opponent's bench without the need for boss's orders, which means you can have this upside of Serena, which allows you to draw cards and just means that, naturally these Lost Box decks, they're so leaning into Colress, and then you only have room for like Roxanne's and a couple boss. Now you can really drastically increase your supporter count and have like 8 draw supporters at your disposal, and those Serenas still active as boss's orders throughout the game as well. So really happy to see this include the Lost Zone deck specifically have Sableye, which means that you don't have to worry that you don't have boss in your deck because you can Sableye through lower hit point stuff for the most part, which is really nice. So I do think Serena will be included in a ton of decks, and it's going to be a massive card for a short period of time, similar to when Great Catcher came out in the GX era, the sort of tag team era before V Pokemon came out in Sword and Shield. This is going to be a short lifespan, very, very powerful card, basically. We also have this V-Guard energy, which could potentially be coming into Lost Zone Tina to force things out of opponents. It could keep you out of range of a number of attacks. Even in the mirror, it could be reasonable. Do bear in mind, of course, that Temple of Sinnoh is a stadium card that Tina plays. So possibly some minor anti-synergy going on there. Or it may be less effective than you'd like because there is that stadium, but even then it's a 1 count, and you could easily foresee an opponent lost zoning those cards because like before they see a V-Guard energy, because it's usually just a tech card for Kiram, right? So yeah, the V-Guard could come into the deck list, maybe overtaking a couple of these capture energies, and it could give you a sort of tanky avenue with your Tina, which can serve all sorts of purposes. It means you can discard your energy in a different sort of way, or sorry, lost zone your energy in a different way, knowing that your Tina is going to survive a hit, which can sometimes have massive benefits, which is really cool. But yeah, I think Serena's guaranteed and V-Guard is a possible include. Onto Kiram Palkia, and once again, Serena's going to be showing up. I think, again, strict upgrade in this instance because you have discard synergy with water energy in the deck already, so having this extra discard fodder via Serena in the opening stages can be nice to fuel your discard pile with water energy for your Palkia's V-Star power. And at the same time, you are likely playing Irida, and you can play cross-switchers if you really want to. So you can play Serena cross-switcher rather than just like the 1 or 2 count of boss that you play right now in the list. So that's another avenue for the deck, and again, it just sort of increases your overall draw supporter count, which is no bad thing in general. I think the Alolan Vulpix is the thing that really stands out to me. Likely only a 1/1 line, but serves a very similar role to having Empoleons in your deck list, because the Snow Mirage is a wall-breaking attack. It gets through all effects on your opponent's active, which is very helpful. And, of course, it hits the 160, which is way better than Empoleon's lower damage output, because now we're getting through caped Miltanks, right? So that's a really big deal. And by that same merit, there's actually a couple things that are really nice about this Alolan Vulpix V-Star in other matchups as well. Having this Silver Snow V-Star power is very similar to trying to get the Palkia's V-Star power off on a Kiram, where it's just a huge bunch of damage all in one go, specifically into the Mew matchup because they play so many Vs down very often. And you can catch other decks off guard by doing this at the same time. And obviously, because it's a 0 energy attack cost, you can be manually attaching to VMAXs on the bench, which are very difficult for me to deal with. They need to have all of their modifiers and belt at times. So yeah, the Vulpix can be almost like a Mutech that's more versatile than a Drapion, which I think is pretty interesting, whilst also being a Miltank answer. And at the same time, because the opponents can't hit you if they have abilities, it's actually like a mirror tech as well, because Palkia, Kiram, Radiant Greninja, Guru, basically the whole deck plays abilities, and Kiram, at the very least, is not known for playing Path to the Peak. So I think 1/1 Alolan Vulpix V-Star could be very, very strong into Kiram Palkia. I also think Kiram Palkia has an even better standing going into the Silver Tempest format, because I think we're seeing a little bit more, especially now with V-Guard energy, that sort of 200 threshold that we've been used to for a little while, thanks to Tina coming out in the format and being that critical number. I think that narrative is going to change that little bit because we have Radiant Guardians in more decks, we have Big Charms, we have V-Guard in a ton of different archetypes. The fact that Kieran can go that one step further in damage, I think is a really big deal and makes it, for me, the most appealing beat stick going into the next set. So yeah, very, very strong deck, I think, in general, and can make this tweak for 1/1 Vulpix, and I think it's just going to be a keeper, to be honest, in the deck list. Onto Palkia Intel, not too much to say. Typically plays one boss, change it to a Serena. You're already playing cross switches. Why not have an additional draw supporter for a deck that is pretty much known for having Feast or Famine starts? Having just 1/2, maybe, because the card's an extra draw supporter coming into your deck list, can give you a little bit of peace of mind to actually get going in the game. Wouldn't that be nice? Onto a Lost Zone box. Again, Serena's showing up all over the place. Now, I have got a little bit wacky with this one. I do think Lost Zone box could easily stay exactly the same and just add like a couple Serenas over the one count of boss that we're sometimes seeing in deck lists. Because again, it adds to your overall support account. But if we're getting wacky with Mirage Gate and 2-prize Pokemon, you could see a Grove Tablet just to give yourself a V-Star power. I probably think it's not good enough, but it can give you some Roxanne proofing in a way. Even just by tableting a 2-prizer on the bench, it may force the opponent into playing differently by like bossing up the 2-prizer instead, and then you get to keep your hand at the same time. So a bit of interesting back and forth going on there with the Grove Tablet potentially. Do bear in mind though, of course, that tool removal is a thing as well in the game. But really I'm more excited about these couple new 1-prize additions that we could be having into the deck list. And this is an interesting one. If people really go down the Serena rabbit hole, we could start seeing Ariados provide a lot of value, where you can get this ability online, turn 2, and you can be adding the costs of V-Star's attacks by 1. And this can really allow you to run away with the game in some instances by just having extra hits with Cram and extra sprinkles with Sableye, targeting certain things very aggressively, and it just means they can't really keep up, and at some point you'll get that free turn, especially with a burst of damage from a Radiant Charizard. It's much less likely that the opponent has a bounce back response to that, which I think could be very dangerous, actually. So yeah, this Ariados could maybe see play there. And also the Jinx is interesting, similar to a Miltank, but it's much more sort of upfront damage rather than route, which is kind of situational damage at times. The opponent's already trying to keep a low enough bench size against Lost Box anyway, in many instances, because they're afraid of sprinkles from Sableye and whatnot. So having a Jinx here that can do more stable damage that you've sort of prepared for can be very handy, and obviously it doesn't give up a prize card and can force, again, Gusting, which means they're not using Marnie or Roxanne, which is, again, good news for Lost Box. So definitely getting trickier. Maybe the Jinx is good enough that we go towards Twin Energy. Maybe the Ariados is good enough that we cut Fogs and go to Level Balls. So I think there's wiggle room for Lost Box. Definitely stuff to try. It could well be that none of these cards make it into the deck apart from Serena, but they are options nonetheless. Onto Mew. I think Mew is going to be very happy adding in these cards into the deck. Mew is very much known for trying to just take the 2/2/2 prize map, and Serena is going to help you do that. I think with Palpad already in the deck list, you can easily go to Serena 1 boss and be very happy with that. Or if you are playing cross switches, just go the full Serena count. Again, it's stopping you bricking turn 1, it gets you in the game, and Mew doesn't really care, like especially DTE Mew, doesn't really care about what supporter it plays turn 1 going second, so you may as well get some extra dig into the deck to actually get rolling, which is great peace of mind for you. And then Grove Tablet as well, more peace of mind. It gives you some protection against Path to the Peak Marnie combos or Path to the Peak Roxanne combos. Now people have to add in a tool removal as well in the mix, or they have to try and gust up and deal with the thing that you've attached a Grove Tablet to, and then try and hit you with Hand Disruption later. And just by putting this tool onto a Genesect, it can force a more awkward prize race as well. So I am excited by Mew Genesect going forward. I think internally the 60 gets more consistent, if that was even possible, and more or sort of less volatile to Path and Marnie and Roxanne, because again, just by having a Grove Tablet in your deck list, it's an extra Stadium Bounce if need be, because you can use this ability under Path to the Peak, of course, because it's not an ability on a Pokemon, it's an ability on an item card, which Path does not shut down, which is a really big deal. Now, before we get too carried away with Mew, of course, we have the Drapion technology, and we have V-Guard energy. And it doesn't sound like much, but that extra reduction is so annoying, especially for DTE Mew, how we're playing it right now. Those reductions really make it a pretty awkward, resourcey war for Mew Genesect. So I do think it will still have challenges going into the next set, but I do think we're going to see more play from Mew Genesect on the whole, because you draw more cards because you play Serenas instead of bosses now, so you get into the game more, and you survive the sort of mid-game more because you have Grove Tablet now. So a lot of people are going to get carried away with Mew Genesect. I think it's more or less as good as it was in terms of its meta placement. And we have the technology if we want to keep it in check anyway, so I don't think anyone should be too worried about this archetype. But definitely one of the best abusers of the new Grove Tablet tool for sure. Onto Regis, huge sigh of relief really for Regis that you get to play some Gust in the deck, and it actually has synergy with the list finally, because Boss usually was just this bricky card that would clog up your Regidrago and just be a horrible card when you're trying to research dump anyway throughout the game. The Boss had to find its way in the bottom like 15 or 20 cards in your deck to actually be a useful option. Well, now you have Serena, and possibly multiple, because this gives you extra discard synergy for special energy or just going lower. So again, you can top back up on cards and then try and do Drago shenanigans afterwards, whilst also being, you know, in that bottom 15 cards, finally a gusting option for you to deal with V Pokemon. So I'm excited to see Serena probably be this sort of 2 count in Regis, where it always felt bad to make space for Boss. Now I think Serena's a pretty big upgrade for the deck actually, and I would still be pretty concerned about Regis. I think, again, it continues to be in a decent meta placement. Lugia probably isn't the easiest matchup, because I would imagine they are going to play Dunsparce and Sharon, but make them have it, you know, that sort of thing. Onto Hisui and Zoroark, again, it's a heavy, aggressive boss deck. Play Serenas now. You are very similar to Mew in that you only care about dealing with 2 prize Pokemon anyway, or 3 prize Pokemon. So let's just try and take out those Vs as quickly as possible. And why not give yourself, again, extra discard synergy for your Gengars and other stuff in the opening stages, a little bit of draw, and it just means that your overall support account is way more useful in these opening hands. I think Serena's just overall such a great card for the game, because now, if someone really has bricked, they've got very unlucky going second to have missed all their Serenas and their Researchers and their Marnies and whatever else, like their Iridas. We just have, you know, back to the good old days of like 12 draw supporters in decks, which is going to be a great sight, I think. Everyone gets to play the game. Amazing. Onto Bliss Tank. Loves playing Serena, certainly, but I do think it will probably play Boss as well, because oftentimes your mission is to deal with the answers that deal with Miltank, so then your Miltank can win you the game. But the thing I'm certainly most excited about is V-Guard. Blissey, one of the best abusers of V-Guard energy, because of course you can recover it when a Blissey does actually get dealt with, but the fact that you have so much healing inbuilt, you can get multiple dips with this V-Guard energy. It's a constant pain in the neck for players to come up against. Of course, it doesn't stack, but you will probably still play 2 to 3 copies just because you want to see it early, and you want it to be active on not only your active Blissey, but even bench Blissies if they're on, you know, if you want to start attaching to your next one, that's going to be very helpful to you. Grove Tablet's a card I don't think you'll necessarily play, but it could come into the deck list because, again, it's just like an early game card that can get you into the game. For a deck that has very little tutor and just has sort of draw options, this can be a decent card to get you rolling. So obviously it's a little bit weaker than having a caped Blissey in the opening stages, but not the worst card. Certainly in the top, you know, in your opening hand, I think you'd be happy enough to see it to get you going in the game. And then Jinx, similar to Miltank, just that side damage can be more aggressive, especially when a Blissey's sort of been dealt with and you've put a huge chunk into people. Sometimes Route still doesn't do the job, but a side damage will get you there at finishing off a Pokemon, so could be a useful like one-of that, again, still forces one prize Pokemon into play, and then you can sort of deal with them with your Blissey, and then again, you force them into play, so then the Miltank can be your late game win condition in certain instances. So I like the option to have Jinx in here at the same time. Onto Arc Goo, a couple things. Really just utility supporters. Boss was just a 2 count in Arc Goo, and that's always made me a little bit nervous. So increasing that count by turning them into Serenas makes me feel a lot better about myself, so you can actually get into the game, which is always great. Worker's probably a card that I don't want to play, but if you do want to represent that Stadium War and again be a draw option, you could go for the card. Really, I think we're going to have too many supporters already now that I'm increasing counts of supporters just to have Serena in the deck, that we don't need the worker, but this could be a way that you can try and fight that Stadium War and protect against Path, that sort of thing. Because, you know, it's better than playing, I guess, a 4th cave in some instances, because, you know, every time you just need to draw cards, the worker's there for you, so that's something to bear in mind. But also the V-Guard energy is actually probably the biggest thing again. Gudra has a colorless in its attack cost, as well as obviously Arceus does, so this can be another great Trinity... Star birthable option to make your Gudra even tankier. It can even help you out against like rope shenanigans because the Gudra goes from that 270 up to the 300 now, which can again put you out of range even when people are doing the shenanigan boss rope stuff. So you can just be internally bigger tank even without the rolling iron, which again is a great feeling, I think. It could even allow your regular V to stay out of range if you've got Guardy down as well as V-Guard energy attached. It can be a huge way to sort of keep yourself in the game. So definitely a nice card to come into the Arc Goo, I think. Onto Arctina, very similar story, to be honest. Serena helping out. Typically the barrel builds are heavy on boss, so let's go heavy on Serena. And again, discard synergy is very helpful for the barrel when we are trying to cycle. So that's always good for declogging when need be. But again, V-Guard could be coming in. There's colorless in the attack cost of the Tina, just like the Gudra. So you can try and do some funky stuff. I do think this deck goes a little bit more all-in. So allowing yourself to V-Guard your Tina after you've loaded it up with the Trinity Nova can be so powerful, because then you can much more comfortably go, you know, retreat your Arceus or whatever, or switch into the Tina, then just remove energy from an Arceus, knowing that Tina sticks on board for 2 turns, because it's just too tanky now with V-Guard, with potential Guardy, or with potential Big Charm. In a lot of instances, your Tina will just sit on board, which is very promising. So, yeah, I do like this. I think you can also yoink some spaces in the list by cutting those bosses, and you already have like quite a high support account when you're playing, you know, 4 Marnie, 4 boss right now, and like 2 research and like 2 Raihan. You could probably eat into those counts by just removing the bosses, adding in the Serenas. Maybe you can just forego research altogether, or play 1 just for a Starbirth option, because you still end up having like 10 draw supporters, so you still have a decent amount to get into the game in the first place. So it could be a great way to add in some extra cards that we're looking for, you know, extra switches or rope, some nice tool cards that could get thrown into the deck list. Definitely stuff like that is on my radar, or even just fitting the space for the 1/1 Flying P that I've put on the slide here, because, you know, Lugia is a key weakness. Blissey and Reggie's both look good. Blissey with the V-Guard, Reggie's with Serena helping consistency. It might be time to squeeze that 1/1 Flying Peak back into the deck list. Onto Control. There isn't really much of an identity for Control right now. There hasn't been much of one in the Lost Origin format, but there are some cool stuff. I think in general, a V-Guard energy again makes Mewtwo tankier. This is obviously healing 200 a turn, so you can get multiple dips on this V-Guard. It means you now sit out of range of like Duraludon and a few other things like that, which is really helpful. So Mewtwo's tankier than ever, which is a little bit scary, but there you go. And there's also the option to have Ariados, of course. And again, you could really benefit from Serena being in all these deck lists, and suddenly Ariados sits on board the entire game and really annoys opponents. It can combine with Hammers, with Flannery, with Yveltal, all those shenanigans. You know, even a Lecky bringing back item cards like Hammers and whatnot. It can be something that gets them. So yeah, let's keep an eye out for Ariados. I'm not just talking about Mewtwo v Union here, of course. I'm trying to also encompass the sort of like Miltank, Morpeko, Lecky deck. Basically, I'm trying to say that there are new avenues for Control, and I think there's a lot to experiment with here that do have potential. So that leads me on to those general meta shifts. If it wasn't clear, Serena in everything adds consistency to every deck. Very, very happy to see it. I love just every deck getting into the game. And of course, this is supporter form as well, so it's mostly helping player 2 make that comeback. It means that you're not just insta-bricking, which is such a big deal for you. And it also increases that general supporter count, and in general the boss count as well. So Roxanne's, etc., just give you Serena that little bit more, because you're happier playing an extra copy of Serena than you would boss, because it's still a helpful card in those opening stages. So yeah, and also punishing V Pokemon in general is no bad thing, I don't think. It could allow us to creep in some one-prize Pokemon in terms of engines, certainly. And even our Radiant Pokemon stick on board that little bit more, I think. Also, V-Guard Energy, I think this is one of the other best cards of the set, honestly. Serena and V-Guard are some of my highest rated cards right now before the set review, because I think it just has so much versatility. Very, very strong. That reduction is huge right now in games that go, 3-4 turns. That reduction, keeping yourself out of range, is massive. And I think it's going to be really awkward for the decks right now that can get to KOs but have to sort of do gymnastics to get KOs. Mew is looking for belts and many, many tablets to sort of get over the line. Palkia Intel wants the opponent to go wide. You need to go wide. Sometimes you need to get your Zigzagoon. Sometimes you need your belt. Sometimes you need tool removal. Sometimes you need Inteleon. All this sort of stuff. And the V-Guard just pushes you that much further out of range. I think Palkia's already starting to incorporate things like Crabominable for tanking decks in general. But I think these sorts of techs are the things keeping Palkia Intel alive right now, because there's going to be even more things just sitting out of your range, which is going to be awkward for Palkia Intel going forward. And I do think this could be... it's hard to say it's the beginning of the end for such a strong deck that's still very versatile, but I think it's going to be very awkward to race against other big V-Stars. That was previously, like a couple sets ago, Palkia's main thing. It was so good at doing that. Now it's known for being like more intricate with its damage, can be cheeky with Greninja when it needs to, so the Palkia will still have like great comeback potential and whatnot, but it's less good at just sort of bashing through everything when it goes first and starts a Palkia and it's just turn 2 taking names. I just think that's a lot less of a thing going forward. And then finally, Control. I'm scared for Control. I want to take Boss out of all my decks and play Serena because they draw cards. But any percentage points of Boss coming out and Serena's going in means annoying bench-sitting one-prize Pokemon can generate value and can be a huge issue for people to deal with. So I think there will be a few crafty players trying to take advantage of the general meta shift where Serena is clearly the stronger card, but it's really that tug of war of how many boss do we play versus Serena, find that right balance, because if everyone's straight on the Serena 0 boss index counts, that can certainly get punished going forwards. Let me know what you think about the impact of video. What else have you got your eye on for Silver Tempest? What decks are you playing right now? And what archetypes do you think are going to be the strongest coming into this next set? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.